early warnings save lives. They must be accessible, understood, and actionable for every one of us so that we can face the impacts of climate change together.
Early warnings are more than weather forecasts.
To empower individuals and communities to act in sufficient time.
Early action is anticipating risk.
Key to saving lives and livelihoods, especially for those on the front lines of the climate crisis.
Son instrumentos que nos permiten monitorear eventos de manera eficaz y oportuna para la toma de decisiones.
Early warning systems should be people-centered
and save lives for everyone, everywhere.
Early action.
Early action is anticipating.
Early warning should
early warning and early action to better protect.
The best examples of early warning and early action take account of a hazard-prone area's risk profile and, importantly, give special attention to the most vulnerable people, since with disabilities, migrant and indigenous people, early warning followed by early action needs to be central to any strategy to reduce disaster losses. Excellent work is being done by the Cruise and Reap initiatives to make up the severe deficit of early warning systems in low and middle income countries.
And a very powerful way to adapt to climate change is to invest in early warning services and especially impact-based early warning services. We have also lack of basic observations from Africa, Latin America and island states, both Pacific and Caribbean. So we have to invest in observing systems and improvement of the early warning services.
Extending access to climate information early warning system is a key focus for the United Nations Development Programme.
2021 is the year to bring forecast-based systems to scale. The moral and economic case for forecast-based action has been made, and now is the time to align partnerships and financing and ensure that in a year from now, we'll have prevented millions of lives from getting destroyed by predictable climate hazards.
adaptation strategy to be effective, it must result in climate risk being considered as a normal part of decision making. New knowledge is required on climate impacts, particularly on regional impacts as well as on the economic cost of action and inaction.
GFDRR and the World Bank will continue to bring resilience to scale around the world by maintaining key partnerships among international organizations, forecasting experts, and disaster risk specialists and at-risk communities, more players and resources around the table.
We cherish the strong multilateral support for these endeavors. There truly is no substitute for cooperation. We must invest more resources, human, financial, and political, into early warning and early action, as well as adaptation and resilience.
Climate information has now become more than a decision-making tool, but has been upgraded to a level for sustainable development.
Early warnings are enabling organizations and communities to mitigate the impacts of disasters through the use of forecasts and risk analysis.
We look forward to continuing our strong partnerships to bring resilience to natural hazards to all.
Many developing countries still lack access to multi-hazard early warning systems.
Early action is anticipating risks rather than reacting after it is too late.
The climate crisis is far from if or when. It is now.
We must prioritize support to people most exposed and most vulnerable.
Early action.
Early action.
Early action is anticipating.
Early warning should be.
Early warning systems.
Early action.
Welcome to you all joining us for our event, Getting Ahead of the Climate Curve, Investing in Early Warning and Early Action. My name is Claire Doole and I'm your host. Our event is part of the Climate Adaptation Summit, and the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has just given his opening remarks. What did he say? I quote, "Early warning systems and risk-informed early action are not at the scale required." He said 1 person in 3 is still not adequately covered by early warning systems and early action. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about during our event, putting people at the center of early warning, early action, making sure that the early warning information is available to enable action, and of course, the very important question of scaling up. We would also like to hear from you. So in the Q&A, please do ask your questions. And of course, you can interact with each other in the chat, but don't forget to tweet using the hashtag Adaptation Summit. We're here at the headquarters of the World Meteorological Office in Geneva, and I'm delighted to be with the Secretary-General, Petteri Taalas, and also with the Secretary-General of the International Federation of the Red Cross, Red Crescent National Societies, Jagan Chapagain. Welcome, gentlemen. Now, they're both also members of the Global Commission on Adaptation that was set up 2 years ago to integrate climate risk into international and national efforts to get ahead of the climate curve. So, Petteri, a very quick question to you. Why is it so important to get ahead of the climate curve?
Greetings from Geneva, from WMO headquarters. We are a specialized agency on weather, climate and water. We have already seen 1.2 degrees warming so far, and there's 24% probability that we would reach 1.5, the low limit of Paris Agreement, during the coming 5 years. We have been breaking records in main greenhouse gases year by year, and that still continues, and many indicators are going in the wrong direction. This negative trend in climate will continue until 2060s, and if we are lucky with the Paris Agreement implementation, we could phase out. But there's a need to adapt to climate change. This means that we are going to see a growing amount of disasters, and a very powerful way to adapt to climate change is to invest in early warning services, and that's what WMO and many of our partners are interested in promoting.
Thank you very much, Petteri. Now let me turn to the Secretary-General of the IFRC. Indeed, it's about putting people, and those people who are really in the low-income countries, who are the most vulnerable, at the center of all this, isn't it?
Absolutely. Let me start by thanking the WMO and the Secretary-General Taalas for hosting us here. As IFRC, we are really proud to be organizing this event together with WMO crew and the Early Action Partnership REAP, Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership REAP. We're really, really proud to be here. You're absolutely right. This is all about people and the communities. And it's so important to invest on early warning and early action because all the analysis shows that this has the best cost-benefit ratio of any investment on adaptation. It makes sense. It saves money. It saves lives, it saves livelihoods. And this is also a way to support people with dignity. So it makes all the sense to invest on early warning and early action. In this context, I also want to highlight that, of course, getting the early warning is important, but turning that into early action is equally important, if not more important. And in this context, I would really like to highlight the partnership that has been developed. And as IFRC, we are very proud to host the partnership. That's the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership. And this partnership, which brings governments and the different humanitarian and the climate actors together, is developing a very ambitious plan to reach a framework for action, actually, to reach 1 billion people, to make 1 billion people safer from the climate risk by 2025. And using this forum, I would like to invite all the partners to join this very, very important initiative, because through this, we will turn the early warning into early action, and we will make 1 billion people safer.
Thank you very much indeed, a very important target. and it's all about raising ambition. So let's look at our first fireside chat, which is putting people at the centre of early warning, early action.
Early warnings announce imminent impact to help communities reduce losses and damages due to extreme climate events.
As you saw in that video, early warnings are only as effective as the actions they generate. So I have a question for you, and you will see that this question appears on your screen by magic. What is the question? The question is, in how many countries has humanitarian early action been implemented? So you have various options there. You have 9, 17, 24, 36, 56, and 100. So what we mean by humanitarian early action is that action which is taken based on the forecast of a climate hazard. So please do vote at the moment. Which one do you think it is? How many countries are there? And by magic, we should see the results in a few minutes. I think the result might surprise you, and I'll explain a little about this. So I know that, of course, there's many of you will be joining us from all around the world, so there'll be a little time lag on this one. But I am hoping that you can see this poll question, and it's all about the numbers, because there has been progress. We're still a long way to go, but there has been progress. So the question is, how many countries has humanitarian early action been implemented? So let me put you out of your misery there. The correct answer is 56. So you should see the 56 countries on your screens. Now, there may be other countries, so it's not a comprehensive list, but what this map shows is the 56 countries where there's projects and programs where they have looked at the 7 climate hazards. And these can be climate-related or volcanic activity, which is not climate-related. So, as you can see, there has been some progress in putting people at the heart of action. Earlier, I spoke to some experts from around the world. So please have a watch of the video that we recorded earlier. How are we going to ensure that people are put at the centre of early action? Well, we're going to get an international, European and African perspective, hearing from experts from the humanitarian, development and climate world. With me in the studio again is the Secretary General of the IFRC, Jagan Chapagain. Welcome. And joining me virtually is Stella Stephen, who's a Monitoring and Evaluation Officer of the Centre for Community Initiatives in Tanzania, and Carol Dischburg, Luxembourg's Minister for Environment, climate and sustainable development. And Luxembourg has been leading the cruise initiative for the past 2 years. Let me begin with the Secretary General and just ask you, why is it so important to put people at the heart of early action, and how are you doing it at the IFRC?
Thank you, Claire. The first point here is the crisis or the disasters. It could be because of climate or it could be other disasters. What it impacts is people. So if we are not focusing on the people, then the whole purpose is lost. So that's why it's so important that we put people at the center. How do we put people at the center? The first thing is, when there is an early warning, it's very important to engage the people we want to work with. Listen to them, listen to their information, try to understand the needs, and try to understand the type of information they need. At the time of crisis, sometimes it's a chaos and this information is not there. So engaging the people is very, very important. The second aspect is make them part of the planning process. Because they are there, what the needs are, what the needs were before, and what the challenges are now. So if they are part of the planning process, the design process and implementation process, that's when the response becomes relevant and effective. And then, of course, the final point here is that we need to have mechanism in place so that the funding and the resources can be released immediately, preferably before the disaster strikes. Now, in the IFRC, we are focusing, of course, with our 192-member National Red Cross and Red Crescent societies. The first thing is to make our programs climate smart. I think everything we do, we have to look from the climate angle now. The climate should not be a separate siloed pillar, but becomes mainstream in our programming. To make our programming climate smart, we have to listen to the science. We have to take science very seriously. As you know, we have the Red Cross Climate Center in the Netherlands, and they are actually a backbone of our knowledge of science on how do we make our program climate smart. And finally, really investing on the anticipatory financing, the forecast-based financing. But to be able to make the anticipatory financing function, there has to be a massive preparation done with the policies, systems, and tools and procedures. And in the last couple of years, we have actually, in more than 30 countries, have put in place what we call the early action protocols. So before the disaster strikes, if we have the data and if we have the science, we can actually release the funding before the crisis hit. And we have very successful examples from Bangladesh, from Mongolia, from Ecuador, and many other countries. So this is really where our focus at the moment is: be climate smart, listen to the science, and invest on anticipatory financing.
Well, I think we're going to hear from Carol in a moment about financing and financing before the impact. But let me go first to Stella, because as the Secretary General was saying, it's all about involving the communities and in the design phase too. And I know that you're an example of best practice. You have a project in Dar es Salaam and Nairobi called Daraja, which I understand in Swahili means bridge. And what you've been doing is bridging communities in informal settlements in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam with the Met Office. Can you briefly tell us, how are you doing that?
Yeah, thank you very much. We are making the bridge between the Met agents and the community by ensuring that the community are part of the process. And they are part of the process by looking on what are their needs. Through Daraja, we are able to discover that the community have the needs of access. Some cannot access the information. But there was also another issue of understanding the terminologies, the language the Met or scientists are using, they are not well understandable. But another issue was the relevance. The community need to know the information is relevant to them, relevant in terms of time delivery of the information so that they can take the action. But another is what action they should be taking. So through Daraja, we are able to identify those together with the The Met agencies in both countries, together with other intermediaries, for example, media who are disseminating the information, local government who are decision makers, to come together in the co-designing on how well we can enhance the resilience of people in informal settlement. And it has been one of the successful projects because we have been able to identify the channel of communication to make sure that they are able to access the information by using school children to disseminate the information to their parents, by using media such as radio or television, but also using the community groups. These are the channels which we have them in our community, but sometimes they are not considered much. But through the engagement, co-designing, you understand that what are the people needs. But again, we are able to the relevance of the information by producing the downscaled information. And through this, the community have been able to understand the community, the information, have been able to see that the information is relevant to what they are supposed to do. If it's a businessman, then he knows how he can take care of the business. If it's the children to take them to school, then he knows the action to take during the weather and climate events. So the community should be the center of the process.
And Stella, I've seen some videos online, and I encourage everybody to go on YouTube and to look at these Daraja videos. But really, you've got communities in informal settlements like Kibera in Nairobi talking to the scientists of the Met Office, and they're co-producing these forecasts. So how do you get scientists and non-scientists to talk the same language?
It was a very interesting experience because it's a matter of listening to each other. The scientists, as the previous speaker said, that we need the scientists, but also the scientists need to understand what are the needs. Each community or each segment of the people have their own needs. But again, we need to know how do we communicate the information we produce. So we start together through the training, through the discussion, how do you understand these terminologies, how the simple language we could use so that it could be well understood, but also to train the intermediaries, for example, the journalists, to make sure that they understand this information and they are able to disseminate it to the community. So the engagement starts from developing the methodology, how do we do it, whom to engage, but also together in the implementation process. But the key point is also to make sure that there is a feedback mechanism, to make sure that what is disseminated, what is shared to the community is being monitored, and the feedback is brought to the Met agents to improve the product of the service.
And of course, as a monitoring and evaluation officer, that is your job, to know what lessons have been learned. As you say, those two projects have been very successful. What plans are there to scale them up in terms of populations or in terms of geographic reach in Africa or elsewhere?
Yeah, there are some plans at the international level with our partner Resurgence in the UK. There are plans to scale up the Daraja project in Kampala, Uganda. There is a plan in India, New Delhi, but there is a plan also in the Caribbean. But at the local level within Tanzania or in Kenya, we have expanded to work with more settlement, not the pilot project, but also extend the pilot into more schools, into more settlement. And it's good that there has been a high interest from the Met Office in both Kenya and Tanzania, and we are planning in the future we could scale the Daraja project into the more areas within the countries, into more regions.
Stella, thank you very, very much for that explanation of how Daraja is indeed bridging the communities with the science. Secretary General, we heard in that introductory video that there's a lack of early warning systems and of the capacity to translate the early warnings into early action. Where do you see the biggest roadblocks, and how do we unblock them?
number of roadblocks, actually. The first roadblock is, of course, already on the early warning systems. If you look globally, there is uneven investment. In some places, there is investment on the software side, like Stella talked about on the trainings and things like that. But there is no investment on the science, the technology. As you saw when the tsunami happened in 2004, there have been hundreds of thousands of trainings done in Indonesia or in Sri Lanka, but the early warning system didn't exist. While in some other cases, you have the investment on the hardware, but then there is no investment on the software. So then the information generated by the system doesn't get disseminated. So that's uneven investment or lack of investment. The second aspect, I think Stella talked very eloquently, so I didn't want to spend much time, is how do we get that scientific information into the language people understand? So sometimes, we are here in WMO, sometimes the information that comes from our Met offices, very difficult to understand. So we need to get that, we need to translate that, but also then we need to get at the right time to the people. And I think the very successful example we have in Bangladesh is when the Met information comes from Dhaka, the volunteers in the coastal area get that message, translated into the simple language, they sit in the bicycle, go in the megaphone and say, evacuate. As simple as that has saved hundreds of thousands of lives. So clearly that information becomes very, very important. Third bottleneck has been on the financing. Many of our financing mechanism, and I think we have a minister here in the panel, disaster happens, you make a proposal, you do an assessment, you do a proposal, you come with the plan of action, then the funding gets released and the funding goes from headquarter to headquarter, and we waste weeks. So having this anticipatory financing, forecast-based financing, the predetermined mechanism to release the funding could be extremely, extremely important. And final point I want to make here is the silos. I think we are different ministries work in silos in the government. The disaster management experts and the climate experts work in silos. But the communities affected don't care about the silos. They are affected. They need support. They need information. So bridging those gaps and silos would be extremely, extremely important.
So, Minister, there we are. We've got silos and we've got the problem, of course, that the funds come too late. So perhaps you could briefly tell us how is Luxembourg helping that and making sure that the finance doesn't come too late?
So first of all, I must say that I think it's of utmost importance that we recognize that we need sufficient finance available for people directly. So I think that's what both of the speakers highlighted. And Luxembourg is very committed to be coherent what we promised well before Paris. And for this reason, predictability for us is key. So in this new period, we doubled our international commitment for climate finance to 200 million for the next 5 years, which makes us per capita, I think, the biggest contributor to international finance. And of course, it's on top of our official development aid, because it's climate finance. And we also developed a strategy how this money should be invested in order to have the best outcome. And maybe I may elaborate a bit on this, because I think it's of utmost importance that we focus as public actors with public money on adaptation and on the most vulnerable. So for us in our strategy, we've chosen a balanced manner between mitigation and adaptation action. And also we have a twofold strategy, not only to invest in projects, but also to invest in de-risking and having private partners on board with lots of actors. So we focus on the needs of the most vulnerable and on climate justice. We focus on people's needs. So on those countries, and I may say that we focus on the most vulnerable, small island development states. And I think if we look at what is the need in the country, and if we have country-driven projects, that will help us a lot. So it's a principle of equal and direct access, of participation with local actors, of having funding and decision-making together with the local actors and the local level. In Luxembourg, we have lots of projects, national projects with local level, and those are those who are most effective if you have people on board driving those projects. And a fourth point for me, which is important, is really to have integrated approach, not only to tackle climate change, but also, for instance, nature protection, and be coherent with sustainable development goals. So the best prevention is really to get smarter and to use these instruments in order to make good policies. And of course, there we have to break the silos. We have been working a lot in Luxembourg with the finance minister in order to unlock more and more money in order to make capacity building also in our country, in order to understand each other better. And of course, if you look at Cruise, the Cruise initiative, which is really focusing on disaster risk reduction, I think there the gender sensitive approach is of utmost importance. Women and men have different ways of working, understanding crisis, and I think also to have this in mind in all the projects that we do, that we are working for people and with people, is of utmost importance, and that we learn that prevention of events and ambitious targets on the national and international level, if it comes to the climate crisis and to biodiversity crisis, will help us all a lot. So we need also this ambitious framework as politicians and to be coherent with what we promised in Paris a few years ago.
Absolutely. So it's people-centred, and you're mentioning that, of course, different groups perceive messages in different ways, and the importance of being gender-sensitive. I was just wondering, Stella, in your projects, are you dealing with women's groups, and are you ensuring that they are designed in a gender-sensitive way?
Yeah, exactly. The organization actually I'm working has a focus on women, and I think the majority of the community we are supporting, almost 80% are women. And we understand that the weather events are mostly affecting, of course, the general public, but women and children are highly affected. So even through Daraja, that was highly considered by ensuring that even in understanding their needs, there was groups of women, groups of school children to understand those vulnerable groups and how they can be incorporated. And the majority of those who were empowered through this project, I could say 70% are women.
Minister, it's not always easy, is it, to make Met Office information understandable, just as the Secretary-General has said. I wondered whether you had any reflections on the Daraja project and what they've been doing to really bridge the understanding and the action between the communities and the Met Office, and whether that might be a model that you could see for Cruise going forward.
Yes, of course. I think it's really a model if you make people understand each other, because this is the biggest challenge that we have been facing during years, as politicians, to understand what science says. And I think this message has been given not only for climate, but also for COVID, and I hope also for biodiversity loss. So for all the big crises that we see.
So to conclude our discussion, I'm just going to ask you in one sentence to tell us, first of all, Secretary-General, how do we ensure that people are really at the centre of early action?
I think the most important thing is we have to engage with people, listen to people, understand their needs, and take action. Action.
Minister, in one sentence?
Action by all, I think, is the most important thing.
Stella?
Engage the stakeholders, know their needs, and respond to their needs as well.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you to our speakers for that first fireside chat. And I'm delighted to have Jagan Chapagain, the Secretary General of the IFRC, with me in the studio. And Stella, Stephen, I hope, will be joining us remotely. We're getting quite a lot of questions in, surprise, surprise, on COVID. So let me ask you, Jagan, what do you see as the impact of COVID on investing in early warning systems and early action?
Thank you for the questions. As you know, from the COVID's perspective, it has have a very massive impact on people's life. The first is, of course, on the health, including the mental health. There is an impact at the socioeconomic level. The livelihoods of the people have been affected. And the third is, of course, the organizational impact. It's also impacting the organizations and the institutions very, very negatively. And broadly, it's having a very severe impact on the economies of the countries. Now, of course, in this situation, the first reflection could be that we need to start saving. Where do we cut? And sometimes the investment on the issues like adaptation or the early warning or the early action could be a first thing that could come to people's mind. And that could be a very big mistake. Situation like this, where we have the less resources, requires that we prioritize on adaptation, investing on adaptation, in early warning and early action. Because investing on early warning and early action is having the best cost-benefit ratio. In investing on risk reduction and resilience, you invest $1, the saving could be up to $7 to $8. That's what the research shows. So these are the time actually we should not shy away from investing on early warning and early action. I think we should invest more.
Thank you very much. Stella, thank you so much for joining us from Dar es Salaam. In the pre-recorded chat that we did, you mentioned that communities you work with access information through different media. What are the media channels that they're using to access information?
Thank you very much. Through the Daraja project, we are able to develop channels of communication. And I have said earlier, we had through the media, particularly the radio, which was identified as the common channel of communication. But we are able to look on other channels, such as using the school children. And this is one of the very successful channels which was implemented through Daraja, where school clubs were trained through with their teachers, and they were able to disseminate the information to their parents. But again, we had other channels, for example, using the social media, particularly in Kenya, where the use of internet is highly compared to Dar es Salaam. So the social media, such as Facebook, was also one of the channels. But another channel was using the community groups. Within these informal settlements, there are formal or informal community groups, such as those related maybe to savings, and they usually communicate. They have their ways of communication. So we are able to also use these community groups to disseminate the information. And the way we did that was through having leaders within these groups, where the information from TMA could reach to a small group of committee, simplify it in a way that it could be understandable with support from organizations such as CCI and KDI, and disseminate the information to the community groups. So those are some of the channels we are using.
Thank you very much, Stella. And indeed, if anybody wants more information, you can see some great videos which are online about that Daraja project. Thank you very much for joining us today and improving and in really telling us how these communities are working so closely with the Met offices. And also thank you very much, Jagan Chapagain, Secretary General of the IFRC. So we've really heard that it's important to put people at the heart of early warning, early action. Let's move now then to our second fireside chat, which is about getting the early warning information to ensure early action. As we heard in the first fireside chat, it's really important that there's good communication between the communities and the Met Office. But there are also gaps in the underlying information for the early warning systems, and that's what we're going to look at for this fireside chat. So I'm delighted to be joined again by Petteri Taalas, the Secretary General of the World Meteorological Office. Thank you very much also for joining us from the Caribbean, Arlene Leng, Coordinating Director of the Caribbean Meteorological Office, organization rather, and also Jagan Chapagain, who's the Vice President for Sustainable Development at the World Bank. Just an interesting statistic before we hear from our experts. There's a question here. For every 100,000 people, how many are reportedly covered by early warnings? So there's a number of possible answers here: 35,000, 50,000, 65,000 and 80,000. Well, you might be surprised to know that 65,000 are covered. That sounds like an awful lot, but only 113 of the 193 members of the WMO actually responded to the survey, and therefore that's just the reported number. The true number is actually expected to be much lower. So, Petteri, if I could just begin with you. You came out with this climate services report that got a lot of traction in the media in 2020, and it was about the progress that's been made in building resilience, using some of these early warning systems. So could you just tell us how many WMO members actually have these early warning systems, and what's the regional divide of those?
So we have, all of our members have some sort of services, but only 40% of our members have proper early warning services. That means that 60% don't have, and that's an obstacle for development in general. So the disasters, flooding events, droughts, heat waves, tropical storms, they're having much bigger impact because the countries don't have proper early warning services. And that's especially the case in African countries, in Caribbean and Pacific island states, and also some parts of Latin America.
And your report, it showed that it's what they call the triple dividend of having some of these services. Could you explain that?
So from our perspective, we are happy to promote so-called multi-hazard early warning services, so that we would have all of the natural disasters handled in one service. That's weather, climate, water, ocean, and also these geophysical ones, earthquakes and volcanoes under one umbrella. And then we are also happy to promote multi-hazard early warning services with impact. What we have seen, especially in less developed countries, that they can sometimes forecast the event in the right way, but the impact is not understood. And that's what happened in Mozambique 2 years when Cyclone Idai was hitting them. The forecast was quite okay, but the impact wasn't understood, and that's why there were much more casualties and economic losses as compared to the situation in developed country like USA, where people can be evacuated and the impact of the forecast is very well understood.
So indeed, it's really important, this concept of impact forecasting, not just what the weather is, but the impact that it will have.
Exactly. So you have to understand the whole chain from the weather to the impacts and also how to mitigate this risk.
So there's also, isn't there, an actual gap? You've got the early warning systems, but actually translating that into action. Can you very quickly tell us what those gaps are?
So in developed countries, the forecast is typically impact. For example, they forecast what is going to be the disturbance to electric system, to transport sector, aviation sector, and so forth. And in less developed countries, that's usually not the case. So they can only issue the meteorological parameters, but what kind of meaning it has for the ordinary people, for the farmers, for water resource managers and so forth. That's not understood, and that's why we have to transfer the good know-how from our most developed countries to our less developed countries, and by getting some resources we can do it, and usually you get the money back at least tenfold by investing more in such services.
Well, I'm sure that Jürgen Vogler will talk to us about money in a moment, but I just want to bring in Arlene Lang to get the Caribbean perspective there. If you want to reflect on some of the challenges that the SG of WMO has just outlined, but also specifically, what are the challenges that you face in the information for these early warning systems that enable action in the Caribbean?
Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this. I think one of our main issues has to do with human and technical resources. That's what our directors, when I polled them to participate in this action summit, they all identified, a number of them identified the lack of human and technical resources to meet an expanding need. They are very scientifically grounded. They have all of the information, but they do need to have the institution be able to respond adequately. And so the staff needs, the technical needs are there, and those are the main challenges. They also identified the lack of understanding among their fellow agencies and governments for the real important value that national Met services bring to climate adaptation. And so we do have specific cases among our member states where there is this direct connection with the users and co-designing of products and services, but we have a range of capabilities within the Caribbean. We have some of our Met services that are very advanced with Met apps on their phones that go directly to the people to warn them when there is an event. The headquarters of the Caribbean Met Organization is in Trinidad and Tobago, and they are one of our more advanced meteorological services with a presence on social media through Twitter and Facebook and their app. And they are very directly engaged as the authoritative voice for severe weather warnings. And they have a color-coded, people-centered, impacts-oriented early warning system so that other people, normal people, receive this information on their phones, and it provides what the weather will be doing, that kind of information. I'll give you an example. In October 2018, we had a flood event in Trinidad that was forecasted 2 days in advance, and it was a multi-day event, and it affected some 90% of the country, but no lives were lost. Civil defense was put into place, and the National Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Response were in constant contact with the meteorological services. We've also had recently the tremendous damage from hurricanes Eta and Iota in Central America, and also one of our member states, which is Belize, was affected. But the contrast to 1998 with Hurricane Mitch, when the orders of magnitude of people whose lives were lost were on the order of 20,000. In Iota and Eta, which happened within two weeks of each other, with tremendous flooding and so on, they were on the order of 200 lives lost. So we've made a lot of progress in having people understanding that this event is coming, and we're doing better with forecasting them well in advance. And now we're getting people to respond adequately. The economic damage, of course, is still there because the infrastructure has suffered. So that aspect of climate adaptation still has a lot of work to do, and our directors and other stakeholders are being assisted in this process through the cruise program. Actually, we are developing national frameworks for weather, climate, and water services with the help of the WMO Cruise project. In 8 of our member states currently, this process is ongoing, and we'll be finishing this year, early this year, in fact. And so we're very grateful to the WMO and the Cruise Project for their assistance.
Arlene,
So
thank you. Yes, absolutely.
Yes,
I was just picking up on that because that's what the Secretary-General was saying, that it's about this transfer of knowledge, and you're an incredibly good example of that. Let me just go back to Petteri, because there are still, though, isn't there, significant gaps in the data for these early warning systems and the weather models themselves. Can you tell us a bit about that and how you're overcoming that?
Yeah, so to be able to provide good early warning services, you need a massive infrastructure, and the basis of everything are the observations. And at the moment, we have severe gaps in observing systems, especially in Africa, in Caribbean and Pacific islands, you can see on the map, and also some parts of Latin America. And that means that the early warning services, the quality of the early warning services is much poorer, because you are not able to forecast it properly, because you don't know what is the initial stage of the weather. And this is also having a negative impact on weather forecasts worldwide. For example, if there's a lack of data from Pacific Islands, it's having negative impact on the quality of forecasts in Europe in a week's time scale. So we don't know any borders. And that's why we have created a financing mechanism to improve the situation called SOF, Systematic Observing Financing Facility. And we aim at raising $400 million to improve the situation.
Thank you. And let me bring in Jagan here from the World Bank, because I understand that you're supporting, I'm not going to say that long name, I'm just going to use the acronym, the SOF. Can you tell us why?
Look, I mean, Petteri just laid it out very clearly. You cannot have a really powerful weather forecasting system if only 40% of your countries have the hardware and the software to provide, reliable information. So we need to try everything we can to get the other 60% up to standard. Now, many of us have been involved in this for decades. We know how difficult it is on the ground. We know it's not easy in many parts in countries that have poor infrastructure, have capacity issues, have issues of rule of law. There is conflict, there is violence. It's very hard to maintain a weather station when these things are not in place. So we need to get creative. And one thing we really like about the SOF, and that's why we are supportive, is because, yes, we believe it's important to have a system in place. But secondly, we also really need to think out of the box and how to practically do that, so that the stations don't get stolen or get destroyed, or that they're maintained and operated in a proper manner. And I think the team in Petteri's institution and in the coalition, the global coalition that deals with this, has gotten very creative. And let's be very clear. I mean, if I may, I'm an agriculture scientist by background, so weather has been a part of my life ever since I left grad school. And farmers nowadays have it much more difficult to actually anticipate what's happening. Farmers used to pride themselves in their own ecosystem, in their own environment, that they knew what was coming, they could read the clouds, they knew what was happening. They had good information and they could rely on their knowledge. That's no longer the case. Now weather comes harder, it comes faster, it comes more impactful. The droughts are worse, the floods are worse, the hurricanes are worse, and the whole rain patterns are shifting. So I think this is more important than it ever was. And as I said earlier, we are aware of the challenges. We know it's difficult. Not all the money is invested well, and we're very concerned about that. But we are very confident and supportive of the SOF as a tool.
Yes, indeed. Well, I think that's across the humanitarian and development a world that sometimes in projects are not sustainable after the project funding dries up. Right. And this is a way of addressing that. Could you briefly also tell us what else the World Bank is doing to support adaptation efforts?
Well, we are, of course, very much focused on the mitigation agenda and are a huge provider of funding to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in our client countries, getting to net zero by 2050, helping with NDCs, long-term development pathways. But at the same time, everybody recognizes now climate change is here and it's hurting millions and millions of people on a daily basis. We have to ramp up our investments in adaptation. It's very, very critical. I think Aline mentioned it in Trinidad. You have to have infrastructure that can withstand what's coming. You have to have social safety nets in place when people get hurt, when their businesses are destroyed, when bad things are happening as a result of climate change. So there are many elements of this that we are funding and that we are supporting. Very strong investments in adaptation in agriculture, drought-resilient varieties, flood-resistant varieties, pest and disease-resistant varieties, because that's also a form of adaptation to what's coming. Now, these are spreading much wider. The recent locust plague is one aspect of that, which was triggered by a climate event initially. So we're cutting across the various sectors, including in cities, to build more green infrastructure to help adapt to the changing climate. So it's something that we take very seriously, and we put real money behind it. You said, Jürgen's going to talk about money, so let me just talk a little bit about what we're actually doing. We are the largest funder among the global development organizations of both mitigation and adaptation in developing countries. And we do 50% of the climate co-benefits in the World Bank Group for adaptation, not just for mitigation. That amounted in the last fiscal year to about 10 to 12 billion US dollars, just to give you an order of magnitude in our client countries. And as I said, it cuts across all the various sectors of the economy. I'm happy to elaborate in more specifically if you're interested.
Yes, certainly. Well, let's take some of the questions that are coming in from the audience, and I will direct them to one of you, but if another one of you wants to add something, then just signal to me. There's a question here which says, Tropical Cyclone Eloise in the Indian Ocean last week did not cause much loss of life. Why is this? Petteri.
So in general, the good news is that we have seen a drop in the amount of casualties in these natural disasters. So that's good news, and that's because of improved early warning services. And we are disseminating this know-how from our most developed countries to less developed countries, and all of our members have been able to improve their services, although they are not optimal yet.
Understood. We've got a question from Samuel from Zambia. How can a country like Zambia improve on early warning systems so as to increase levels of preparedness to any disaster? I'll hand that one to Petteri. If anybody wants to come in on that, please do.
So the basis first is that we have to have proper observing systems, and that's why we are having the soft to improve that. And then you have to have access to forecasting products, and we have 13 centers of WMO which are providing good high quality early warning services, and then you have to understand also the impact, what are the sensitive issues in Zambia in agriculture, human safety and transport sector, electricity systems, and once you understand those, you can also go to this impact-based forecasting.
Understood. Arlene, there's a question here. How do you get meteorological agencies and island states in the Caribbean to cooperate with each other and with civil protection agencies before and during a disaster?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. My organization, the Caribbean Meteorological Organization, is actually, we coordinate among 16 English-speaking countries in the Caribbean. So there's a long-standing arrangement formally established in 1973, but which grew out of what was the British Caribbean Met Services that started in 1951. So we have a long-standing arrangement, but within Region 4 of the WMO, we also have a method of cooperation, a long history of cooperation through the Hurricane Committee, which includes all of the countries around that are affected by hurricanes, from Canada all the way down to Trinidad, Venezuela, and in the west to Belize, El Salvador, and so on, as far east even as Portugal. So there is a long tradition of collaboration. The CMO works, for example, with Meteo France on the severe weather forecast, what was the demonstration project, but is now the severe weather forecast program. And we also, within the Caribbean, have the Caribbean Disaster and Emergency Management Agency, which does the regional coordination among the disaster offices. So within each country, the disaster offices work directly with the national Met services to get the early warnings out to the public and to prepare and respond and jointly educate the public. And then regionally, we have the SEDIMA working with CMO and our technical organ, which is the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, which provides, that's our regional climate center, our regional instrument center, and various other things such as sand and dust warnings, because Sahara dust is an issue, as we saw last year with this record-breaking dust storms. And so we have within our region people who are already working on this, and the WMO crews and the World Bank crews have brought together these groups to work on regional early warning systems together so that we can fix those gaps that exist to the last mile to get that people-oriented early warning system really doing what it is supposed to do.
Arlene, thank you. Indeed, it is about the last mile. There's a question here, Jürgen, which I'm going to throw your way. It says, how to solve the need of improving human resources in low-income countries with very limited budgets?
Yeah, that's always a tough question, right? There is limited budget for everything, and everything is important and everything matters. So I think we are in everything we do in finance, there is, of course, a capacity building component included, because that is critical. But my experience over the years is that is often not the lack of capacity per se. There are in most countries, Petteri, correct me if I'm wrong, but in most countries you have people capable of doing the job, but they're usually underfunded. They're usually not organized well. They're not getting the support that they need. So I think that's a part of the package of the soft, to make sure that we're not looking just at the hardware or at the software, but that we're looking at the package as a whole. Now, if you allow me, I want to make one comment on a conversation earlier, and that's about the whole impact forecasting. I mean, typically we talk about negative impacts, a flood, a drought, a hurricane, etc. And we've heard good examples how this is improving. Bangladesh, I think, is a key case where, decades ago, 100,000 people would perish in a major event. Now it's down to very, very few. But there's also positive impact forecasting, and that's in the case in agriculture. It is extremely important for farmers to understand what the soil moisture content is that they have. And if there is forecasting saying it will not rain for the next, say, 2 to 3 weeks, what that means in terms of their own management practices, or vice versa. And that has to be directly correlated to at what stage the crop is in the field. So this is an area where satellite technology, algorithms, and ground truthing together can create these models, which are now allowing us to do the kinds of impact forecasting for the food system that we were not able to do in the past. But again, the ground station verification is an absolute key to getting there. Back to you.
Thank you very, very much, all of you, for explaining the work that you're doing on early warning delivery of information so that it does help the people on the ground. Thank you very much, Arlene Lang. Thank you very much, Jürgen Vogler. And thank you very much, Secretary General. Now let's move on to the third fireside chat, which is what do we have to do to scale up? Indeed, you remember at the beginning I said that the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said that we are just not there, and we do need to scale up. So we heard there from the Secretary General of the WMO and also Jagan Chapagain, Vice President of Sustainable Development at the World Bank, about this SOF facility, which is about getting sustainable financing, because you might be quite surprised that if I asked you what proportion of climate finance is spent on adaptation, 5%, 20%, 40%, 50%. Unfortunately, according to the OECD 2020 report, only 21% is spent on adaptation, whereas 70% goes on climate change mitigation. So it's really surprisingly low, and it shows that we have to raise the ambition on adaptation, I would say. And we know, we've just heard from Arlene Lang in the Caribbean, that it is the small island developing states, it's the low-income countries that bear the brunt of climate change. So for our third chat, we first went to the Minister for Education, Gender Relations, Innovation and Climate to get her view. She comes from the small island state of St. Lucia, Gail Rigobert. She's also co-chair of the board of REAP, the Risk-Informed Early Partnership. So we're going to hear from her first and then from our other speakers.
Excellencies, friends, good day. Impacts from climate change-related weather events depend on nature and severity of an event, vulnerability and exposure. Unfortunately for small island and low-lying nations, we are disadvantaged on all three fronts, leading to increased disaster risk. Indeed, in the case of exposed and vulnerable communities, even non-extreme climate change-related weather events can have extreme adverse impacts. As small island and low-lying nations, we know this all too well. We know that a Category 1 or 2 hurricane that is accompanied by excessive rainfall can do untold damage and wreak havoc on lives, livelihoods, property, and assets. We understand all too well what it means to live through no sector being untouched, inclusive of water, agriculture, fisheries, infrastructure, tourism, health, and education, among others. The reality is that whether we are talking about hurricanes, cyclones, floods, sea level rise, drought, food insecurity, it is clear that risk management and adaptation must be tailored to local and regional needs and circumstances in order to be effective. That a successful early warning system saves lives and jobs, land and infrastructure, and supports long-term sustainability. As a small island and low-lying nation, we could not agree more. The need to scale up action to facilitate the proliferation and sustainability of effective early warning systems in our countries cannot be overstated. But for us, this is not only about the early warning required to plan, prepare for, and respond to extreme events, but also about timely climate action by all and sundry, particularly the largest emitters of greenhouse gases, to truly get ahead of the climate curve. I am passionate about the people-centered approach for empowerment and for galvanizing the change that we need to address this existential threat that we face. Passionate about research and innovation towards evidence-based decisions. And certainly passionate about scaling up action, inclusive of early warning systems, timely adaptation action, and mitigation ambition. And much needed investment in support of our particularly vulnerable nations as they grapple with the increased risk of disasters in light of the vagaries of weather and climate events. Thank you for listening. I wish you well and please stay safe.
If we're to scale up, we really need to bridge the capacity gap for low-income countries in terms of finance and human resources so that they can benefit from early warning and early action. With me to discuss this is Stefan Cruzat, France's climate ambassador, and Claudia Timé, a vice president at AXA XL, one of the world's biggest insurance and reinsurance companies. Claudia wears many hats, so she also represents the Insurance Development Forum and the INSU Resilience Global Partnership. Welcome to both of you. I'm going to start with Stefan and ask you perhaps a very obvious question, which is what role is France playing in scaling up early warning, early action?
Well, great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Well, we realized back in 2015 that we really needed to do something in that field, and that's why we launched CRUISE, the CRUISE initiative, the Climate Risk and Early Warning System at COP21, which was a part of the Climate Change Action Agenda that supported the Paris Agreement. And CRUISE really was targeted at least developed countries, small island developing states, because we all know that they're really most impacted by climate, and yet only 20% of climate finance go to LDC, and even less to SIDS, 3%. So we felt that we really need to target these countries, and that's why we came up with this project. Target of $100 million was set by the countries engaging in CRUISE, and we now have 7 countries involved. And today, over 60 billion have been dispersed from the CRUISE Trust Fund. So we're getting there.
As you say, you're getting there, but there's some way to go. So I assume you've got 7 countries, but you would like more to step up and invest in CRUISE.
Absolutely. Well, that's the idea. We're very pleased to announce that. I can announce at this Climate Action Summit that we will pursue our contribution to the CRUISE Trust Fund with an extra 4 million euros, which brings France's overall contribution to over 26 million, which represents almost half of the overall contribution. And what we really would like is for other donor countries to participate in that endeavor, because CRUISE has shown that it really, really makes a difference.
Absolutely. And I suppose before they do want to get their checkbooks out, they want to know what sort of difference. So could you tell us some of the projects that you're most proud of, or what difference it really does make, or early warnings do make in saving lives?
Well, we estimate now that about 10 million people are being protected thanks to these early warning systems through 13 projects by CRUISE, and these projects can be national or regional, covering more than 50 countries in the world. And the plan is to cover a minimum of 2 additional regions and 5 additional countries by 2025. And so we have an operational plan until 2025 that provides a clear roadmap for scaling up investments in early warning systems, improving on service delivery for end users, because that is so important, and increasing the number of countries benefiting the initiative.
So more money is, of course, always welcome, but is it sometimes a case of spending money better or more wisely?
Well, that's a very good point. There's really, it's always the question of, how do you spend the money? It's not a question of quantity, it's a question also of quality. And it's particularly important in the early warning system, because what you really want to address at the end is the capacity of the end users to be warned. it's all very well to improve the meteorological data and so on, but if you don't have, at the end of the day, the person on their mobile phone realizing that there's a wave coming and that they need within 3 minutes to shelter, then what's the point? And that's why it's so important, and that's why Cruise really insists on the end user and really on that service delivery, which is so crucial for making these initiatives efficient and worthwhile.
This is very similar, in fact, to what the Secretary General of the International Federation of the Red Cross was saying to us earlier, that sometimes there's too much investment in the hardware and not enough in the software or the delivery. And you think that needs to be the shift.
Well, exactly. It's really the service delivery at the end of the day. That's so important.
And of course, as we've heard, there is certainly a role for the private sector. I mean, what role do you see for the private sector?
Well, first of all, the private sector is really one of the beneficiaries of this initiative, because if we prevent major damage on buildings, on companies, and so on, the private sector is a true beneficiary of this initiative. So there is really a link that can be done here between private sector. I'm thinking in particular of insurance companies and Cruise.
And indeed, insurance companies are most probably on the front line of all of the private sector when it comes to risk. So, Claudia, exactly as Stefan has been saying, you will benefit yourself from early warning, early action. But in your own words, perhaps you would like to tell us why you are supporting early warning, early action.
Yes, thank you. And absolutely, we do have a common need, which is a priority, which is access to data, and particularly to risk data. The reason why we very much support this is, of course, in our work as insurers, we see firsthand when disasters destroy lives and also the development gains of countries. And so investing in access to data and technology is central to us. And in terms of what we're doing, or the path to that is we have come together as an industry really through different organizations like Insurance Resilience Global Partnership and the Insurance Development Forum to map a path forward in terms of delivering the investment and delivering projects that will benefit particularly vulnerable countries and seeds and all countries really that rely and have a great need for more risk data in order to be able to have the protection that we can afford.
Is there a project that you could very quickly tell us about that you see as a big success as a result of the partnerships?
You know, I think that the success case studies are always based on public-private collaboration. And two very big examples in the insurance industry where we always work with governments or with regional organizations to try and gain the scale and the reach that is relevant. Two good examples are CRIF, the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, and ARC, the African Risk Capacity. And these are regional, multi-country facilities that deliver protection to the vulnerable populations. And they're very good examples because they reach the scale. They are funded by their own governments, as well as having, of course, contributions from donor countries and organizations. And as an industry, we provide technical assistance and the technical know-how to deliver the products and, of course, the capital, right, to provide the protection. And, ARC, for example, has provided protection for more than 2 million people. Both have had payouts very quickly when disasters occur within 2 weeks because they rely on parametric insurance, which works with exactly the same type of technology that Stefan was referring to, that provides an early warning and information about events.
So partnerships work, but there's always a sense, isn't there, that with some companies, they're quite reluctant to engage in some of the settings that we're talking about because of concerns about the regulatory environment. How can that be overcome? How can their concerns be allayed?
It's a very good point, Claire. And it is true that for insurance to work and to be able to deliver the benefit that we offer, the regulatory framework of a country is extremely important. And without it being in place, we cannot deliver the benefit and the governments cannot contract it. And I'll give you very simple examples. There has to be a law that allows for a government to buy insurance cover of which they will not be the direct beneficiary. So this could be smallholder farmers, or it could be schools or hospitals that are not owned by the central government, but owned by regions. And if we go back to parametric insurance, which can play a key role in allowing for early detection of developments in weather that will impact populations, there are many countries where it's not recognized as insurance because traditionally insurance relies on the plan that a disaster happens. And once the disaster happens, you go in, you evaluate what damage is there, and the insurance claim is paid on that basis of assessed damage. While parametric insurance works with a trigger, with an agreed trigger, meteorological or seismic, depending on the case, and triggers a payment on that basis, independent of the damage caused. So we work closely with regulators to actually promote understanding of these new products, but also new technology that enables us to better deliver these solutions, particularly in developing countries.
Thank you. One final question. We heard from Stefan that there's a shortfall of their funding. And he's looking, of course, for other countries to step up, just like France is. Is cruise the sort of initiative that you can see that your members or that the industry should be supporting, perhaps with expertise, but also with some hard cash?
Absolutely, Cruise is the type of organization that we are, in fact, in talks, some of our members to collaborate with. And we have, we were talking about scaling up. This is really the session about scaling up, Claire. And we have something called the tripartite agreement, which is committed to deliver technical assistance and insurance solutions, risk financing solutions to 20 countries by 2025. The three members are Germany's Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, the UN Development Programme, and the Insurance Development Forum. And we are working, we have now 13 countries that have industry teams engaging with government already or about to engage. And many of those projects will actually be working in that direction. And that is why we are already talking to Cruise.
So, as Claudia, you said, this is the session about scaling up. So I'm going to ask you both finally in one sentence. I know that's terribly difficult, but Stefan, first of all, in one sentence, what can we do to really scale up, to bridge some of these gaps and to meet some of these targets?
Well, we can have more donor countries participating in cruise because cruise has proven that it is on the ground, efficient, it saves thousands of lives and it saves millions in assets. So do join this wonderful initiative.
Claudia, in one sentence?
In one sentence, we can collaborate more between the private sector and the public sector. We have the expertise and we have companies committed to deliver this expertise, to deliver solutions, to use the relevant technologies. But we need the public sector and we need governments to consider insurance as one of their tools in their not only risk management, but in their finance management so that we can work together and deliver the benefits.
Stefan Cruzat, France's Climate Ambassador, and Claudia Timé, Vice President at AXA XL, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire.
And indeed, thank you for those speakers who gave up their valuable time earlier. And I'm delighted that we've got Claudia Timme, the Vice President from AXA XL, on the line with us to answer all your questions. We've got a number of questions, Claudia. I'm not sure whether you're going to be able to answer them all, but the floor is yours. So there's one which is, now there's a lot of acronyms here. CCRIF, ARC and other parametric insurance pools only pay out after a climate shock hits. Why is there not a programme for anticipatory finance for early warning on the same scale as the INSU Resilience Global Partnership?
Excellent question. Thank you, Claire. And I'm really happy for this question because parametric insurance is actually the one type of insurance that allows for early payments. So if you have meteorological phenomena that have a slower onset, particularly, for example, drought, and World Bank was commenting earlier as how important it is for farmers to know how much humidity there is on the ground. And parametric insurance can be set up so that it will provide not only early warning based on the technology, but early payments so that farmers can, for example, buy feed for their animals or consider other crops before actually a drought sets in. With a more rapid onset meteorological events, it's a little bit more difficult. Several people have talked about a 24-hour warning. That is also possible, but it's probably less likely or less possible to have a payment before the event happens. But because it is based on a trigger, it will pay much faster, and it allows countries to plan ahead of time and to count on that funding if the index is triggered for very early response that you have in every catastrophe.
There's a very direct question here, which is, could AXA finance efforts by developing countries to reduce their exposure to disasters?
In the projects that we work both with Insure Resilience Global Partnership and Insurance Development Forum, and AXA is very much a part of these efforts. We are working with developing countries, and even when you don't talk about parametric, but indemnity insurance, right, that makes a payout after the disaster happens. I'm working on a project to insure Peru's public schools. And one of the things we look at is that if schools are destroyed, that we have a Build Back Better element, which means that whether it is through reconstruction or repair of a school, it's going to be considering new standards. Many of those schools are very old. And so bringing them to the standards that protects them not only from weather events, but also more resistant to earthquakes. And there are earthquake code constructions in Peru, but not all the schools are up to that standard. And so insurance programs can very much contribute to that, contribute to resilience. And at AXA, we're very much a part of that.
There's a question here which, see whether you can answer it or not. How can we as a private company specialising in meteorology, always very difficult that word, and climate, participate in these global partnerships such as cruise?
I cannot answer for cruise right here, but I will say that in the projects for, as I mentioned earlier, for 20 countries that we're looking to do by 2025, that type of know-how and technology is very, very relevant, particularly because agriculture is such a central part of the activities of many developing countries. And so reach out to us, reach out to the Insurance Development Forum, and cruise, I'm sure, as well. But we're always interested in collaborating, particularly with companies that have relevant technology that help us to deliver very innovative products, because we need to move quickly, we need to make things easier for countries. Technology plays a very, very key role in that area.
Claudia Timme from AXA XL, thank you very much for answering those questions from our audience. There are many more, but we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. Well, we're now going to hear about commitments from other organisations and countries to early warning, early action. So it's my pleasure now to introduce the statement from Ville Skinnari, Minister for Development, Cooperation and Foreign Trade for Finland.
Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, I would like to thank the organisers of the Climate Adaptation Summit and this timely event on disaster risk management. There is an urgent need to speed up climate action and raise ambition on early warning and early action. Finland has an ambitious climate policy. We aim to become climate neutral already by 2035. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions rapidly is crucial, but at the same time, the need for adoption is growing fast. We need to take early action and prevent hazards from becoming disasters. As a most recent step to tackle this challenge, Finland became a contributing member to CRUISE with funding of 5 million euros. We rate highly the role of CRUISE plays in responding to the early warning needs of least developed countries. And of course, small islands, developing states. We must ease the burden of those who would otherwise struggle to adopt and build resilience. Finland welcomes the people-centered approach of CRUISE as we place high importance on gender equality, non-discrimination and disability inclusion. Our funding to CRUISE is also one of our contributions to the risk-informed early action partnership, where we are a convening and board member. Aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement, Finland is committed to scale up climate finance and aims to direct half of the funding to adoption. One example of our increasing adoption finance is the recapitalizations of the Nordic Development Fund together with other Nordic countries with 350 million euros, of which 50% goes to adoption. Finland is also a proud co-chair of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action together with Chile. Dear participants, meteorology is one of the priorities of Finland's development cooperation. We have financed the improvement of weather and climate services of over 50 national meteorological and hydrological services around the globe during the past decade. Finland looks forward to joining forces with multiple partners, public and private sectors, civil society and academia, and creating innovative and sustainable solutions to scale up early warning and early action. We are honored to collaborate and contribute to the goals of the Sendai Framework, Paris Agreement and Agenda 2030. The challenges ahead are enormous, but through multilateral partnerships and cooperation, we can succeed, and our ultimate goal of leaving no one behind. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, the Minister for Finland, for making those commitments to early warning and early action. Now let's hear from the European Commissioner for Crisis management. Janes Lanacic.
Dear colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to thank the organizers for inviting me to contribute to this important event. Climate change is one of the most significant challenges facing our planet. As European Commissioner responsible for humanitarian aid and civil protection, I witness its impacts every day. With the European Green Deal, the European Union is leading the world down a path towards a safer and more sustainable future, a more resilient future. We know that resilience depends on preparedness, and preparedness depends on knowledge and tools that deliver that knowledge to those who need it. We have heard in this event that as part of climate adaptation efforts, we need to forge solutions that bring together early warning tools as well as prevention and preparedness strategies. We have heard about the need to better leverage synergies with disaster risk reduction. However, most countries, even the most developed, struggle to prepare adequately. I would invite you now to consider the fact that today, around 1 billion people live in countries that are unprepared to face the ecological changes they are expected to face between now and 2050, and that are the most vulnerable to climate impacts. And yet, very few of these countries feature among the top recipients of global climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction finance. Meanwhile, climate-related humanitarian costs are forecast to continue growing exponentially. The European Union is determined to make a difference. As part of the EU's new external cooperation instrument, 30% of all funding will target climate action. We are also preparing a new climate adaptation strategy and a new communication on humanitarian aid. Both will stress the need for more efforts on preparedness, anticipatory action, and scaling up international climate adaptation finance. Today, I am pleased to announce that the European Commission has recently adopted a new disaster risk reduction program for African, Caribbean, and Pacific group of states totaling €100 million. It also includes actions to respond to the current COVID pandemic and prepare better for future similar events. Under this new initiative, a €10 million contribution is foreseen for the Climate Risk and Early Warning Systems initiative. This will support the deployment of effective early warning systems, including preparedness activities in the countries hit the hardest by natural hazards. I wish you all an enjoyable and successful event.
Thank you, the European Commissioner for Crisis Management, Janes Lanacic there. Well, all eyes are now on the COP26. That's a key milestone for countries to meet their commitments under the Paris Agreement on climate adaptation and mitigation. And the UK is hosting that conference. So I'm delighted to be joined on the line now by the UK Minister of State for Business, Energy and Clean Growth, Anne-Marie Trevelyan. Welcome, Minister, and please tell us about some of the priorities that the UK has for this conference on adaptation and resilience.
Thank you, Claire. I'd like to start by providing my thanks for the invitation to join you at the conclusion of this really important session on investing in early warning and early action, and of course to the Government of the Netherlands for hosting this Climate Action Summit at such an important time. It's been such an interesting session. We've heard from so many passionate voices, actively engaged in so many ways to drive disaster early warning development. It's been a really interesting and challenging session, I think, and I just thought I'd offer some of my reflections from the discussions that I've heard. From your first fireside chat, it really captured the essence of success for early warning systems, that they have to make sense to and be able to be acted upon by those they are meant to help. As the Secretary General of the International Red Cross and Stella Stephen highlighted, those most at risk need to be at the heart of the planning process for it to be effective. They're the people who understand best how to build what will be the most impactful and wide-reaching messaging when the technical information warns of climate shocks. And I wholly endorse Stella's comments about empowering women to be key players in the design and delivery of these plans. And that's something I'm going to be working really hard on as a key issue in the year ahead. Your second fireside chat with the Secretary General of the WMO set out so clearly that we need to have enough weather observation networks which can provide that effective and timely information so that then we can build the early warning systems around them. And Arlene Lang highlighted that we need to build the human and that technical resource in so many more communities in order to meet the sadly expanding need that climate shocks are bringing. And then, of course, in your third fireside chat, the challenge, that question of scaling up, the critical enabler for delivering all the life and livelihood saving solutions which are needed to protect so many vulnerable communities across our planet. We have programs running, working to grow those capabilities, but there is much more to do. I think it really is clear that more and more people across the globe will be affected by extreme weather events of increasing severity in the years to come. So this is an agenda for us all. It's also clear that some countries will be hit harder, and within each country, some communities are harder hit than others. So we absolutely need to keep people, especially the most vulnerable, at the forefront of this discussion. And as we've heard and I've set out, there has been encouraging progress in recent years. There have been, of course, valuable advances in technology and climate science, in predictive and forecasting capability, and therefore in anticipatory action and mass communication. And these impressive advancements do mean that even remote communities can be better informed about those upcoming hazards. So that does have the potential to put us all collectively in a much stronger position to be able to deal with our climate challenging environment and to find ways to reduce the impact and costs of extreme weather and other impacts. But we really haven't yet maximised the full potential of these developments, not by a long way. And it is a pressing imperative to do that. So we need to do everything in our power to make the most of these innovations and the new approaches and to take them to scale. And I don't think we should shy away from the reality that money will be important for that. And the UK has committed to doubling our international climate finance to £11.6 billion over the coming 5 years. We also aim for a balance in the UK's international climate finance spend between mitigation and adaptation, recognising the importance of adaptation, especially for the poorer countries and their communities. So we're working with other countries on their climate finance commitments and the extent to which they can give more priority to adaptation. And we hope to hear more on that soon. But this isn't simply an issue of the quantity of finance available. We need to ensure that it is being invested in the best possible way in order to have maximum impact. So I think whilst the focus of today is on those climate-related hazards, over the past year, the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated that the risks we face as humanity are many, complex, and they are interrelated. So it doesn't make sense to work in silos and focus on different threats or hazards in isolation. We need a full understanding of risk and a concerted effort to work together across mandates, sectors, and silos to ensure that our respective skills and strengths are genuinely complementary, that our whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And the risk-informed early action partnership that we heard about, one of the partners organising today's event, is an international mechanism that is bringing together the climate, development and the humanitarian communities across governments, across civil society and the private sector. Its aim to make 1 billion people safer from disaster is possible. REAP's doing this by supporting a systemic shift towards acting earlier. We know that giving people just 24 hours notice of a disaster can significantly increase their likelihood of survival. And this is to be achieved by sharing good practice and members inspiring each other to take action and sharing with the partnership what each of us will do to improve our readiness and response. So the UK has already committed £175 million towards REAP's work, and we're encouraging other donors to join us. Because the economic case for investing in early action is compelling, For every pound spent, over £10 of benefit is gained. So if your country or institution has joined the partnership, I want to recognise your commitment and say that we are so pleased to be working with you. And I want to encourage all of us to set out how we are responding under the REAPS Framework for Action being launched today. So if you haven't already joined the partnership, please do join us. You will help strengthen it as we learn from you how you are responding to disasters, as well as you having the opportunity to benefit from the experience of others. Because it is only by working together we will be able to adapt at the speed, the terrible speed that we need to do to get ahead of our game. It is only by working together that we'll be able to protect our loved ones, our homes, and our communities from the worst effects of climate shocks in the months and years ahead. So as we look forward to COP26 later this year, Claire, I've drawn great encouragement from today's discussions. I think it's clear that there are opportunities to adapt and to become more resilient, and many are taking action. And there is such strong commitment and determination to find the best ways to achieve this. So I'm looking forward to pressing ahead on this issue in the coming year and to welcoming as many of you as possible to Glasgow in November for the COP26 conference itself.
Thank you very much, Minister. For one, the succinct summary of those 3 fireside chats. So thank you for doing my work better than I could do it myself, and also for outlining the UK's commitment. Thank you very much for joining us. And we're also joined by the UN Assistant Secretary General from the UN Climate Action Team, Selwyn Hart. Now, you might have spotted him in the opening video of our event, but welcome, Assistant Secretary General. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Claire. And it's always difficult to come after our champion on adaptation and resilience, Anne-Marie Trevelyan. But I just want to thank all of you for convening this event and allowing us to share a few thoughts as we head towards COP26. There are 3 sort of common threads that I took away from all of the sessions today. The sense of great urgency. This is a monumental task, but we must approach it with a much greater sense of urgency. Secondly, the collective ambition that I've heard from colleagues from governments, the private sector, and civil society. And third, the need for innovation. Innovation in terms of the tools and instruments that we need to better adapt and design to address this existential challenge that many countries are facing. During his speech this morning, at the Climate Adaptation Summit, the Secretary General called for a breakthrough on adaptation and resilience as we head towards COP21. And he outlined 5 important acts. Many of you have heard them before. But he highlighted the need for us to scale up the volume and predictability of climate finance devoted to adaptation and resilience building, including increasing the share of adaptation and resilience finance to at least 50% of total climate finance flows. We're very encouraged that the Netherlands has heeded this call, and also that the UK will definitely strive to bring greater balance to its climate finance commitments and will work with other donors and partners. Secondly, he also called for the integration of climate risk into policy and decision-making processes at the national, regional, and local levels. And I've heard many of you indicate that this is an important precondition for unlocking important flows of finance towards adaptation and resilience. He also called for scaling up of existing catastrophe-triggered financial instruments and also looking to develop new instruments to incentivize ex-ante resilience building in vulnerable developing countries. We need to do both in parallel, and they need to develop at scale and with a much greater sense of urgency. Fourth, he also highlighted the need for us to ease access to finance for the most vulnerable, for the SIDS and for the least developed countries. Right now, these countries' access 14 and 2% respectively of climate finance. And this needs to change given the enormous threat that these countries currently face. Finally, he also called for increased support to local and regional climate adaptation and resilience initiatives. These impacts are local. It's best if communities and peoples who are most effective have a much greater voice in designing many of the solutions to the threat of climate change. As you can tell from my accent, I am from the Caribbean, and I am acutely aware that climate risks are increasing and facing all societies across the globe. The COVID-19 pandemic has taught us many lessons which are very relevant to our collective response to the climate challenge. First, we must trust science and base our responses on the best available science. Second, early action and investments in preparedness, they help to minimize future shocks. And finally, we are only as strong as our weakest and most vulnerable links. This is why it's absolutely important that we continue to fully support the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership Framework for Action and the Climate Risk and Early Warning Systems Initiative. And we're really encouraged by the new commitments that have been made to both initiatives. The Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership was launched at the UN Secretary General's Climate Action Summit in 2019 with an ambitious aim to make 1 billion people safer from disasters by 2025. The partnership we have seen today between CRUISE and REAP are exactly what we need to help bridge the early warning to early action divide to protect lives and livelihoods from the climate crisis. Friends, we are in a race against time. We have the tools, we have the skills, and we have the commitment. We've heard it today to protect the most vulnerable. We now need leadership and decisive actions. We will continue to call for action and engage with leaders at all levels and from all sectors to secure that breakthrough that the Secretary General has called for. And we hope we can leave COP26 with the certainty that we are protecting lives and livelihoods and on track to a more resilient future. I look forward to working with all of you on the road to COP26. We can deliver on the urgency, ambition, and innovation that all of you have expressed here today. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Assistant Secretary General. Thank you very much, the UK Minister of State, for joining us at the end of this event, which is Getting Ahead of the Climate Curve, Investing in Early Warning, Early Action. And I think we have, as you both have said, seen that it's about partnerships, the partnerships that we've been mentioning throughout the event, the REAP, the CRUISE partnerships, and indeed the Swahili Daraja Bridge, but to find and fill these capacity gaps that exist between communities, which is really important going forward. So all I have to say is thank you very much for the four hosts of this event, REAP, CRUISE, the IFRC and WMO here in Geneva. Thank you everybody also for joining us, for your questions. Please stay safe.
Early warnings save lives. They must be accessible, understood, and actionable for every one of us so that we can face the impacts of climate change together.
Early warnings are more than weather forecasts.
To empower individuals and communities to act in sufficient time.
Early action is anticipating risk.
Key to saving lives and livelihoods, especially for those on the front lines of the climate crisis.
Son instrumentos que nos permiten monitorear eventos de manera eficaz y oportuna para la toma de decisiones.
Early warning systems should be people-centered
and save lives for everyone, everywhere.
Early action is anticipating.
Early warning should
Early warning and early action to better
The best examples of early warning and early action take account of a hazard-prone area's risk profile and, importantly, give special attention to the most vulnerable people, persons with disabilities, migrant and indigenous people. Early warning followed by early action needs to be central to any strategy to reduce disaster losses. Excellent work is being done by the Cruise and Reef initiatives to make up the severe deficit of early warning systems in low and middle income countries.
And a very powerful way to adapt to climate change is to invest in early warning services and especially impact-based early warning services. We have also lack of basic observations from Africa, Latin America and island states, both Pacific and Caribbean. So we have to invest in observing systems and improvement of the early warning services.
Extending access to climate information early warning system is a key focus for the United Nations Development Programme.
2021 is the year to bring forecast-based systems to scale. The moral and economic case for forecast-based action has been made, and now is the time to align partnerships and financing and ensure that in a year from now, we'll have prevented millions of lives from getting destroyed by predictable climate hazards.
Adaptation strategy to be effective, it must result in climate risk being considered as a normal part of decision making. New knowledge is required on climate impacts, particularly on regional impacts as well as on the economic cost of action and inaction.
GFDRR and the World Bank will continue to bring resilience to scale around the world by maintaining key partnerships among international organizations, forecasting experts, and disaster risk specialists and at-risk communities, more players and resources around the table.
We cherish the strong multilateral support for these endeavors. There truly is no substitute for cooperation. We must invest more resources, human, financial, and political, into early warning and early action, as well as adaptation and resilience.
Climate information has now become more than a decision-making tool, but has been upgraded to a level for sustainable development.
Early warnings are enabling organizations and communities to mitigate the impacts of disasters through the use of forecasts and risk analysis.
We look forward to continuing our strong partnerships to bring resilience to natural hazards to all.
Many developing countries still lack access to multi-hazard early warning systems.
Early action is anticipating risks rather than reacting after it is too late.
The climate crisis is far from if or when. It is now.
We must prioritize support to people most exposed and most vulnerable.
Early action.
Early action.
Early action is anticipating.
Early warning should be.
Early warning systems.
Early action.